have this recorded.
Great.
Hey, Lori. All right, you guys, welcome to our Body Electric webinar featuring my friend Emily Sutherland. I'll let her give herself an introduction here shortly, but just as a little bit of background, she and I met, I think we met mutually through Amy Snow, who most of our team knows Amy. She and Amy attend the same church, and she was part of a mastermind group locally that I participated in with Amy a few years ago. And so she and her husband Scott have become friends of mine, and every once in a while I run into her at Patachou, and she's like buried into a computer or notebook and writing away. But I come to learn that she's got this amazing background and expertise in storytelling, and especially in telling other people's stories, which is fascinating. So some of the coaches on this call have been part of a private mentorship with me just this summer, where we've been talking a lot about storytelling and how we can really combine the worlds of marketing and online marketing to telling our story. Because at the end of the day, we all know that people buy not just what we do, but why we do it. And so I think this comes at great timing. I think this is going to be a great way for us who are all secluded at home to really dig into our backstory, to be able to share that, to be able to create our, sort of, I guess I should say, improve our status as an influencer, right? By creating more trust with the people who are following us. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily. I know she's got a lot of cool stuff ready for us. Hopefully you guys have a notebook, or you have maybe a Word doc open on your computer or something so that you can be taking notes and following along. But I'll hand it over to you, my friend, and I'll let you introduce yourself and give us a little story of who you are, and then dive right in.
I will. Thank you. It's fun to see you all, and I wish we were in the room so I could, I like interaction and question and answer and stuff like that. So I would love to have a system where if you have something to say, just flag me down so that we can address any questions, or you can open your chat. I will be watching that, and as I talk, we'll feel free to chat. Again, as Jenny said, I have been a storyteller my whole life. Like, I can remember waking up in the middle of the night because my parents were laughing in the living room with their friends telling stories. It was just always, our lives were based on stories, and I didn't even know it. I didn't know that everybody didn't just tell stories all the time. And a lot of the family members that I don't even know now, I never even met, I feel like I know them because my family has always told stories. And as I grew and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, writing was just the natural thing for me to do, because I am just very obsessed with words and storytelling. And it was such a part of my culture. So the fact that I can remember in my 20s thinking, I wish that I had a job where people just said, here's a bunch of stuff that I want to say. Would you just say it in a good way? And then I ended up getting that job at Gaither Music Company. And I did that for 20 years. And they literally would come to me and be like gobbledygook, or I would sit in a room with Bill Gaither and he would say, I need to say something like this, and we need to mention that. And then they would have me put it into a video intro or a piece of marketing copy or whatever it was. So I learned to speak in other people's voices during that time when I was working in the music industry. And so learning to tell people's stories through their eyes was a whole learning curve that I'd never really thought about or had to do before. And so I got to do that for 20 years in a lot of different ways. And I learned a lot of different ways of storytelling. The music industry, always, there are songs, that are released that are story songs that tell people's life experiences. There are videos that are more biographical, kind of documentaries of people's lives. And that's a great way that we learn to tell stories. And somewhere along the way, I started learning how to help people tell their stories through books and through bios, like artist bios. You get to tell the artist story, and that would make people want to invite them to their event or whatever. So I just kind of learned storytelling in a lot of different settings, and I learned it on the go. My degree is a business degree, and I had a writing class, but it wasn't, I have to make everything that I do story, that's just part of my DNA. So as part of the music industry, yes, I had all this business education, but I had to figure out how do I tell stories with this education. So that's a little bit about my background. I went freelance about 3 years ago, and I have written, the founder of Auntie Anne's Pretzels, Ann Byler, I've written a book that she released in 2019, I think it was. And I'm losing track of my years. I think that was 2019 that The Secret Lies Within released, and we're now working on a second book, which is about the way when she built Auntie Anne's Pretzels, the way that she built that company, and it's actually an international franchise now. And it started at a farmer's market stand. So she was raised Amish. She learned how to bake, and then she went on to be this amazing entrepreneur who's known all over the world. So it was an honor to tell her story and to do it in book form. And a lot of times these events that I do like this, when we're talking about storytelling, a lot of times we'll talk specifically about how to write your book. And if any of you are interested in actually writing a book, I do a whole day seminar about writing your story in the form of book. And because I have a little bit of a process that I do that keeps it from taking 20 years. It's okay if it takes 20 years. A lot of people, it takes that, but I do have a process that I help people with. But tonight for you guys, I know that short form storytelling is probably something that would be more helpful to you. Please nod if that is true. If you would rather hear more about book writing, we can talk about that. But is it short form, like blogging, social media, is that mostly the kind of storytelling you're interested in learning how to do? Yes.
Because of our group that we're doing, because we are doing mostly social media, that is what we focus on. However, I'm very interested in the other one too. So
okay, let's email after if you want to know. I need to set a new date. I had one set right in the middle of COVID world, and I had to just postpone it. And I have, somebody already signed up for the next one, and I need to set a date.
Yeah.
So email me later.
I will, absolutely. Will you put your email in like the comments so that we have it, or?
Of course, yeah. Yes. I'll even put it here in the chat, and that way you just have it. And I'm going to do it now because I have a little bit of ADD. Yes, you can be a writer and have ADD.
See, that's my problem. That's why I haven't gotten anything written. I have it too.
Well, you can write a book. You can finish multiple books and still have ADD, but it takes some workarounds I've had to learn. So we can talk about all that. It's good to see you guys, and I wish that we had the space and we were in the room where I could hear your stories. I'd love to know what brought you to Beachbody, and all of your journey, how you got here, and maybe we can all have coffee individually and figure that out sometime. But in the meantime, I'll just kind of give you sort of some of the processes I've found helpful. Because when I'm telling someone else's story, it's a very different thing than when I'm telling mine. And you probably get the opportunity, I hope that you get the opportunity to do both, that you can tell your story, your health journey, or Jenny and I were talking earlier about how we could all probably write numerous stories because we all have, a health story, a family story. Many of us have stories of loss or different challenges that we've dealt with in our lives. And so, figuring out where to start and, all of the hurdles to even begin writing your story, it can feel a little overwhelming, and it doesn't have to be, I will tell you. And as, if my ADD's out there, if you understand ADD at all, you can feel like, oh, I've got this idea and that idea, and you just never land on one, and for me, that's something that a hurdle that I've had to learn to deal with. So we'll talk about some strategies to kind of get you into the headspace where you can look at your story objectively and be able to tell it in a way that really engages people. Because sometimes the story, the version of the story that we tell ourselves over and over again, there may be things that we can do that makes it really connect with people better. And so we'll go over some of that. The first thing I always like to do, though, is I think there's a pre-storytelling process that is important for me anyway, and I hope it will be helpful for you. There's an inner critic in most of us that keeps us from ever wanting to tell our own story. And I hope I'm not the only one in the room here, but I would assume that most of us have different narratives that we maybe tell ourselves, like, my story isn't very interesting, or I'm afraid to tell my story, or if I tell my story, my family will be disappointed, or if this is a jar filled. The last storytelling school I did, we were in a room and I had people just write, like, what is your inner critic? You know, what do you need to silence? What is the message that's, you know, constantly ringing in your ear before you tell or write your story? And the ones that came in might be ones that you would recognize. But I would love for you to put in the chat screen, if any come to mind while I'm talking. I would love for you to type them into the chat screen here, so that I can know, you know, some of the things that your inner critic is saying. But I have a bunch that were in this jar. It was a filled jar. It was only 10 of us in the room. People just kept cramming all of the messages that they wanted to silence into this jar. And the reason that we use the jar is based on a little piece that I want to read to you. The book Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott is probably one of the most influential books that I ever read as a young writer. And writer / storyteller, you know, it doesn't have to be the written version of your story, but she really did help me figure out the path out of my head and into the world with my story, and or with anything I wanted to say. But she's very funny and dry. Anne Lamott is. This is a book I highly recommend if you've thought about writing your story. But I think we'll relate to this little segment on page 24 of Bird by Bird. She says, first there's the vinegar-lipped reader lady. She's talking about all the people that show up when you sit down to write, right? The vinegar-lipped reader lady who says primly, well, that's not very interesting, is it? And then there's the emaciated German male who writes these Orwellian memos detailing your thought crimes. And there are your parents agonizing over your lack of loyalty and discretion. And there's William Burroughs dozing off or shooting out because he finds you as bold and articulate as a houseplant, and so on. And there are also the dogs, let's not forget the dogs in their pen, who will surely hurtle and snarl their way out if you ever stop writing, because writing is, for some of us, that latch that keeps the door of the pen closed, keeps those ravenous dogs contained. Quieting these voices is at least half the battle. I fight daily. She says at least half the battle that I fight daily. And this is a professional writer. She writes, I don't even know how many books she's written, and New York Times bestseller. And she daily fights these voices that I fight, and that probably many of you as well fight. She says, but this is better than it used to be. It used to be 87%. Left to its own devices, my mind spends much of its time having conversations with people who weren't there. I walk along defending myself to people, or exchanging repartee with them, or rationalizing my behavior, or seducing them with gossip, or pretending I'm on their television talk show, or whatever. I speed or run an aging yellow light, or don't come to a full stop, and 1 nanosecond later, I'm explaining to imaginary cops exactly why I had to do what I did, or insisting that I did not in fact do it at all. I happened to mention this to a hypnotist. She slurs. I saw many years ago, and he looked at me very nicely. At first, I thought he was feeling around the floor for the silent alarm button, but he gave me the following exercise, which I still use to this day. And this is where we're getting with the silencing the inner critic. Close your eyes and get quiet for a minute until the chatter starts up. Then isolate one of the voices and imagine the person speaking as a mouse. Pick it up by the tail and drop it into a mason jar. And she says, then isolate another voice. Pick it up by the tail drop it in the jar, and so on. Drop in any high maintenance parental units, drop in any contractors, lawyers, colleagues, children, anyone who is whining in your head. Then put the lid on and watch all these mouse people clawing at the glass, jabbering away, trying to make you feel like shit, she says, because you won't do what they want. You won't give them more money, you won't be more successful, won't see them more often. Then imagine that there's a volume control button on the bottle. Turn it all the way up for a minute. Listen to the stream of angry, neglected, guilt-mongering voices, then turn it all the way down and watch the frantic mice lunge at the glass trying to get to you. Leave it down and get back to work. So that is why I always collect these inner critic voices into a mason jar, because I imagine them as little mice that are trying to keep your story from getting out into the world. And there are so many people out there that need to hear your story. They need to know that they're not alone, that their experiences, you know, and the feelings that they've had, even if their experiences have been very different, they need to know that the emotions that they've had or things that they've been through are just them. You're going to hear my dogs in the background because I think somebody's coming to the door, so I apologize for that. Excuse me. Is everybody with me? We're good?
We're good. But I am going to pause you really quick and just say, since you're walking to another location, and say, hi, Gabriella. This looks like her first Zoom call. She's a little baby here. Hi. Okay, you can carry on now.
And I'm sorry about the S word. It popped up in that dialogue and I didn't know there was a baby in the room.
Oh, she's an itty bitty baby. You're good.
Hopefully it went right over her head. So I would love to hear you. I'm seeing some typing in the chat room, and I'm loving what I'm seeing, even though I'm sorry that you fight these voices. Just know that it's very normal. One of you mentioned feeling not good enough. It's so common. Some of the ones that are on the jar, in the jar that were in my last class, literally had the exact same phrase of feeling not good enough. I don't feel like I have a story to tell, Gina says. Absolutely. I mean, you do, but I get it. Yes, Jackie had the same thought. I'm not that interesting and no one will care anyway. Listen, that's mine. So you're not alone on that one. It's not a big enough story. That's a good one. We just need to, I want you to imagine yourself just cramming those phrases. If I could just like pull them off the chat screen and put them in this jar. People are tired of hearing my story. Judgment, fear of backlash because my story's different. Oh my goodness, yes. That's, I mean, those are lies, you know, that come to us, but they feel real. They do feel real. Let me see, Abby, sorry about the toddler. I hope that you're able to come back. Says here, I fear that people will not believe my personal story as it's a modern day Little House on the Prairie. I love that. Fear that people won't believe you. Listen, we can deal with that. You know, you can put in detail and people will believe you. But I get it. You know, I understand. I hear I'm not a good writer all the time. Was there a teacher, Jenny, that said that?
No, I hear from most of these coaches all the time. They say, I'm not a good writer, or I don't have the gift of words, so I'm not good at telling my story. That's an excuse I hear a lot.
Sure, I get that. I mean, most people who don't think they're a good writer, a lot of times they've been told that by an English teacher. And you know, the second grade version of you or the 7th grade or the 10th grade version of you is not the version of you that isn't here now. And one person's opinion doesn't, it's just not true. You know, anyone can learn to tell your story in a great way. If you don't like to write, I mean, there are days I don't even like to write because I feel like it's like, oh man, they're telling a story well, it just feels hard. And you just sit down and silence all those voices, you know, put them in the mason jar, turn up that volume and, I see you over there, and then turn them down, and then begin to put into place what it is that my life, my experiences can give to the world. And really, when you realize the power of your story, and there's no way that I can overemphasize how important it is for you and for other people that your story is known. The things that begin to happen when you tell it, once you've done that a few times, you realize I can't not tell my story. But a lot of people get stuck at the can't, and they don't find out all of the crazy things that unlock in you, in your relationships, and in just your path in life when you get your story out into the world. I don't understand it totally, but it is an incredible gift to you and to the world when you can really put words to your experiences. Some simple ways to tell your story, and for you guys, you don't have to be a great writer to tell your story. You can tell it on video vlogs, in blogs, and even I've seen people do almost like a picture montage with a story. There's so many creative ways with multimedia to tell it. It doesn't just have to be a book or an article, or there are so many creative ways to tell it. Even just one-on-one, when you're with someone and they want to know who you are, it's a wonderful thing to be able to kind of have a process for telling your story and your experiences, and particularly your story of transformation. I don't think anybody is in Beachbody because it's easy or because you just didn't have anything else to do. You wanted a healthier life. There's a reason that drove you to that. So that's an important part of the story. So I would say, make it really simple for yourself. And as you're preparing, like, okay, what am I going to say? What am I going to tell my story? Even if it's on social media, before, during, and after sort of path for your story is a very simple way just to be like, what was it like before my transformation, or a turning point, or whatever moment got you to the after of your story. If you're still in the middle and you don't have the after yet, that's okay, because nobody relates to the high success. They want that, but that's not where they connect with your story. That might give them hope, like, oh, good, maybe I'll keep going. If you have a transformation that you can say, oh, before, during, whatever those parts of your story are, they led to this result that was success, that was health, that was, energy, all the things that people want. They don't necessarily connect with that part, even though they need to know it's there. Does that make sense? So some of the things that I love to remind people of when they're beginning their, to learn how to tell their story on the before and the during and the after, using the 5 senses is a great thing to help you as you're writing. Say, okay, let me put myself back in the before, and let me draw for people like one specific moment that kind of personified the before. You don't have to tell 10 years and all the things that happened, but maybe there's one story where you felt something and you just thought, I don't want it to be this way anymore, or something that was hurtful, or something, maybe an injury, or those moments when you can take people back to a moment and recreate that moment, and use the 5 senses, what you were seeing, what you were feeling, what you were smelling and tasting, and things like that. Those are things that put people there, and those are the things that other people can like be on the path with you as you're telling it, I'm just doing a real quick check to make sure if you guys have any questions along the way, just put them in the chat, and I'm just going to stop every now and then and just make sure that I'm not missing anything. I always like to do an outline as I'm preparing, whether it's a book, whether it's, I'm just going to share my story on a blog or whatever, a podcast. My husband and I do podcasts sometimes, and we usually just kind of do an outline. And so for your outline, you could do a before, during, after, or you can go down to a real specific moment where you recreate, your Anne Lamott has a lunchroom story where she talks about all the different kinds of lunches that the kids brought, and if you had white bread, that was cool, and if you didn't, then you were socially going to struggle. And she has this whole thing about the lunch room at her school, and that story talked about how she felt, it kind of revealed how she felt about herself as a kid and how important it was to have the right cool lunch box and the lunch items that people, the other kids would make fun of, basically. But through that story, it took us back to a time in her life when she was trying to figure out if she was okay and what people thought of her. But she told it in this way that she was in the lunchroom, So taking people back to a very specific moment and recreating that moment typically connects with people in a deep way, more than trying to cover a lot of ground and tell about all of the things that happened. And so, a well-chosen moment can be a very powerful way to tell your story in a way that connects. Because social media is such a powerful driver of story right now, and because of what you guys do, that is a really helpful way for you to be able to tell your whole story, but you're doing it in little increments, in a post, in a photo. It could be a photo of when you were a kid, or when, maybe a before, during, and after, experience you can show visually. Those kinds of micro stories can, over time, really make people feel drawn into your journey, because we have many stories that we can tell. So I would encourage you, as you're thinking about your story, your journey is this big umbrella, but it's made up of so many moments that you can capture and bring people into that really help them come along and help them relate. Like, oh man, I felt that before, or I remember being in the lunchroom and feeling that way, or, So I think some of the fears that people, that you've expressed and that we all have, is that maybe it's not interesting. But if you go into those details and really put yourself there and feel the feelings that you were there, in that moment in your story that you're trying to recreate, trust me, as simple as it sounds, me and Lamont did it with her lunch table. People relate. And if you're using the 5 senses, if you're using the emotion, really putting yourself there and trying to see what you saw during that time and create it for people, they can't help but be drawn in, to your experiences, and probably will respond overwhelmingly that they have had those same thoughts or experiences as well. But those are the levels that we don't often talk to when we run into each other. When Jenny and I run into each other at Patachu, we don't get into our stories sometimes. And so it feels vulnerable, it feels like, oh my goodness, this is all I have. Like, my story is so vital to who I am. And if I tell it and it's not good, then I'm not good enough, like people think this, and it's just not true. Your story is valid. If you're living and breathing, your story is valid and important, especially in what you're doing. When you're trying to, lead people on a journey, as you are, your coaches for something that's difficult. Listen, I've done Beachbody. I about died. but I did it. And I really, really understand for you guys the commitment that you have to have. You know, it's not just something that you decided to do one day and then, you know, you're like, oh, I'm just going to try it out. I mean, it's a commitment, and it changes your life. It changes your body. It changes your mind. And I love when I hear, you know, a before of someone saying, you know, I used to not be able to sleep at night. And, you know, I remember one night, blah, blah, blah. And they would get, and then all of a sudden they can sleep at night. I'm thinking, okay, I've got to do this because I can't sleep at night sometimes. It's not going to, it may not relate to everybody, but your story will relate to somebody, and it'll probably be more people than you could ever imagine. But when you tell it, it unlocks something in you. And the vulnerability, I've never had anybody tell me, I'm so sorry I told my story. I've never had that happen. Because when you let it out, and when you really tell those parts of the story that you aren't sure you can tell, especially the one, like the part of your story that you don't think you can tell, you got to tell it. Trust me, because those are the things that people are going to connect to. Because when you are vulnerable, there is something that happens that just, it's almost like Velcro, you know, that people grab onto it. Jennifer Norris, I see you. She was at the previous story telling class, and chime in here because you've got all the notes, right? Just checking the chat box to make sure if you have any feedback or questions or anything, just don't hesitate. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, the why of telling your story. It unlocks things. It's bringing people along. Instead of telling, show people, you know, through the events of your story. You don't just tell them this is good for you, you need to do it. You can talk about your experiences, and that rings true with people. One of the processes that I recommend, this is when you're writing your story, this works, but I really feel like it works for anyone who is trying to think, okay, you know, what is a process for writing story for me that will be, that will connect with people? And I usually recommend there are 4 phases. There's inspiration. Hey, I think I'll tell my story. I think, you know, Jenny wants me to, or maybe it will help me, you know, kind of connect with people in a different way. Or, you know, maybe I had one book I helped a woman write last year. She's the survivor of an abduction, and she wanted to write a book because she had no idea how to survive it. She didn't know what to do. And she wanted a book of somebody that had survived one, you know, and she wrote that book. And, you know, so there are many, many moments where you have this inspiration, like, man, you know, there should be something that says this, or, you know, there's a part of my story that I really would like to tell, and I'm inspired to tell. Then start working on it. How am I going to tell it? Is it going to be through social media? Is it going to be through vlog? You know, is it going to be a YouTube channel? Is it going to be a podcast? You know, kind of do your preparation, try to figure out, you know, what is the best tool for my personality and my, you know, comfort level and my audience, you know, your influencers. Where are the people that you influence? You know, where can you reach them? Do some investigation. So once you've had your inspiration, do the preparation and really learn how to tell it well, and where you're going to tell it, and begin to research how to tell it effectively, where you're going to be. YouTube, you know, is a whole animal that a lot of people do a lot of storytelling on YouTube, and my kids will watch that over television sometimes. It's a very powerful search engine, and maybe that's a good, you know, avenue for you. Then, you know, the actual writing part or telling part is the perspiration. That's the 3rd phase. That's the part where you're getting in there and you're going, okay, what comes first? What comes second? And then there's publication, where that's the fun part, where it gets out into the world. And so inspiration, preparation, perspiration, and publication is kind of the path of getting your story from your head out into the world. And we do a lot of work around that on my one-day writing event that I do, the storytelling school that I do. It takes a long time to walk through all of that. So I almost feel bad that I'm just sort of like rushing through that part, because there's a lot in there. But in general, that process can help you to sort of get it from the head. Like sometimes we're forever letting it be in our head, getting that preparation stage, moving it from the head into like, okay, maybe I'll take some steps. Maybe I'll reserve a URL, or I'll, that kind of bumps it from your head into an action point. And then the perspiration is, that's the part where you kind of have to be like, okay, I'm committed. I'm doing this. I'm gonna, pull the plug on the YouTube, video, or I'm gonna, whatever pieces that you need to put together. That's the part of actually doing it. And then you put it out into the world. And when you're doing that process, it's a really good idea to start. A lot of people say in business, start with the end in mind. It's a very good way in storytelling to think about what you want somebody's takeaway to be. So, there may be many takeaways, but what is the one that you're going to be like when somebody tells somebody about my story? What do I want them to say? That story was about this. And it should be pretty easy to say in a phrase, Now, that said, some of the stories I've written have been very complex and layered, and there's nothing simple about anybody's story, right? But if you're clear on the takeaway, that helps you know where you're heading. So it helps you avoid rabbit trails that aren't adding to the story. So every part of the storytelling process, you can go through and say, does this add to that takeaway that I want people to remember? And if it doesn't, do I delete it, or do I need to make it better? Do I need to put more visuals in? Do I need to bring people into the scene? What was I seeing? What was I feeling? Or does it just not belong in this story? Maybe this belongs in another story that I'll tell. So when you're starting, always decide near the beginning. And you can wander your way to the takeaway. It just takes a longer time. And for me, I just really need to kind of know where it's going, because I can write for 5 years and never get to the end if I don't know where I'm going. So I think that's a helpful thing. And so for each blog post, say, what is the one thing that I want people to walk away from this with? And then everything's about that. And that way you can keep it concise. You're busy. I know other people are busy that you're leading and that you're influencing. So, to hone into your story and really tell the meat of that story in a way that engages people, and it doesn't side trip, rabbit trail, but it keeps on toward that takeaway that really gives people a path, and it really brings people along, and it's very engaging. I think a lot of people remember stories when you're able to really, have a path and know where it's going.
Hey, Emily, I'm going to chime in just because, if that's okay. I don't want to.
Please. Oh, I love it. Any comments, anybody that wants to speak? I need the interaction. I love the interaction.
Yeah, well, I don't want to interrupt the flow, like if you're in your flow, but it just made me think I'm in the middle of this. I think I told you this earlier. I'm in the middle of this marketing course that I'm taking, and they're teaching us how to write our story too. So I'm kind of like, that's in my brain, and then you're talking, and I'm kind of connecting the two. And so I was just going to share out loud a couple of things. One that you said was, you know, when we're telling our story, obviously we're breaking it down into our before, during, and after. But in the before, which is what was my state before I made this decision, right? Mm-hmm. How critical it is to really just zero in on a moment. And I love how you keep calling it a moment. I love that you keep saying like moments are what's helping people relate. Because I think a lot of us are like, we start our story with like 10 years ago, right? Like, and then we go into this like long saga, and we don't necessarily have our primary takeaway in mind when we start the story. We just know, right, I need to start my story, or I need to write my story. And therefore there's no clear direction, but then there's also, we're not zeroing in on a moment either. And so when people ask me like, well, I struggle with sharing my story, I just want to reiterate, I don't want you to share your novel of a story through social media necessarily. That's something you could do with Emily in a full day workshop if you wanted to write a book, right? But like for your story on social media, for those of us that are creating a brand and we're influencers, the idea is to really focus in on those moments. You have multiple thousands of moments, right, in your story that you can pull out and use as your social media content. So I love that you've mentioned, you know, the struggle is what connects with most people, using the 5 senses, putting them in the position where you were. And I would just say that for those of these guys who've been working with me this summer, I've been talking a lot about storytelling. And one of the words that I've been using, which I've been taught, is the word epiphany. How can we create an epiphany in our potential customer, which I think is your word for takeaway, right? You're saying, what's the takeaway? What do you want the person to come away from the story with? And in our situation, right, we are the guide. We're trying to position our customer or potential customer as the hero of our story. We're the guide that's going to get them there. I think we're looking to create an epiphany for them. So I think it really does come down to like, how well can we describe a moment? How can we describe like who we were and what we were like before? And I would challenge everybody on this call to, especially if you're going to hopefully take what she's teaching you and do something with it, I would encourage you to write out your story. This is a challenge, without using any Beachbody product or name or brand in your story. That's going to be the hard part, right? 10 years ago, I started, and it's hard for me too. I started with P90X, right? Or I did this with Shakeology, or I lost weight with this. People aren't necessarily buying into the product. They are buying, they buy why we do it, right? They buy because they're in the same position we were in when we started. And so they believe we can help them get somewhere. Does that make sense? So I just wanted to kind of jump in and add to what you're saying before you continued, because I wanted everybody to kind of connect how we can translate storytelling to marketing and piece that together. But carry on, my friend.
Oh, good. Yeah. So good. I love that. And I love that you've been taking, you know, the marketing version of storytelling, because the two are really, I mean, storytelling is just, people remember story and they remember moments powerfully, you know, much more than, you know, like you said, the product or the, you know, the information. Now, data tells a great story. You know, you can give stats on, you know, things all day long, but people don't remember that. They'll remember how they felt or how they connected to how you felt. And that's powerful. I love reading others' stories. I think that's a really powerful, I don't know, it gives me the impetus sometimes to look at my story differently. So I would encourage anyone who is thinking, you know, I might have a story to tell here, and you all do. I'm not saying might like it's might. I'm saying that's what we tell ourselves. You do have a story to tell, and it's important to see how other people told their stories. When we talk about the before, during, and after, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to tell the story in chronological order, right? Sometimes you can start at a critical moment, at a decision point, and then maybe, you know, take them back to a moment in childhood when you had that same feeling, or, you know, it doesn't have to be you don't have to tell it chronologically in order to tell the before. and the during and the after. That may sound counterintuitive, and let me know if that feels confusing. But sometimes, you know how on like a television drama, they'll come in at this crazy, like, you know, incredible moment, and then they'll go back and they'll kind of have a, you know, 24 hours earlier, and they'll start, you know, telling what led up to that crazy moment. Sometimes you need something at the beginning of the story to catch someone's attention, you know. So the abduction story, you know, we're not going to be like, well, I went to the Catholic school and I did things. I mean, we're starting that story with, you know, she was in crisis, and so, and then she went back and talked about experiences that had led up to that, you know, that event. So, you know, just because I say all that to say, because we're saying before, during, and after doesn't mean that you have to tell all of this, the moments chronologically. I believe there are probably hundreds of ways that you can tell your story effectively. So, you know, in your mind, as you start to think through your own story, and I'm sorry, can you hear the dogs in the background?
Just a little bit. I mean, I can hear them yapping, but I can hear you better.
My daughter and her friends just got home. She turned 21 yesterday, but we were traveling, so all of her friends are coming over. And she, you know, kind of let me know that they were going to be coming right during this call, and they're here. So they'll be piped down in a second, but they're arriving, and the dogs just keep going. So I apologize for that. And I apologize that it's on the recording. So the, let's see, what was I talking about? We were talking about the chronology, but also the, let me see here. Nope. Man, I hate that. I started talking. That's the ADD kicking in. I had a really great moment that I was going to talk about. Where did it go? Well, I'll keep going, and I think it'll come back. I think that when we start talking about, should I tell my story, there is not one way to do it. There's a million right ways, right? So don't get stuck in like, what's the perfect way that I should tell it, or what's the right way? You know, one of the little mice in the jar here that someone wrote down was that they were afraid they weren't going to do it right, or that it wasn't going to be interesting. And, you know, I would just encourage you to play with it. You know, don't try to hit some mark that you think somebody else would expect. Tell it your way, because it's your story, and you can tell it with the words that you use. You don't have to make it sound like someone else. You know, part of learning to really tell your story effectively is find the words that you use. You know, listen to yourself when you speak. One of the really fascinating parts of me doing a lot of ghostwriting, so I write other people's story in their voice, right? It's almost like an empathy thing where I have to like get in their head and figure out how they want to say their story after they've told it to me. I find myself listening to the words they use, listening to the things that they make them laugh, you know, just the idiosyncrasies in their voice, because that makes their story so unique to them. The same is true of all of us. The way that you speak, the expressions that you use, it's so good to include those things when you're telling your story, because if that's you, you know, that's your DNA. It doesn't have to sound like, you know, Elizabeth Gilbert, because she had this great success with Eat, Pray, Love, and everybody loved her book, but that's her voice and that's her story. And your story is absolutely as fun and engaging and important. And I would want it to sound like you and not her. But it, you know, that's the upshot, is that when we hear other people and how they tell their stories, we get ideas. But when we do that, we need to also come back to our own DNA, you know, and the things that make us unique, and the expressions that that we find are indicative of how, how our personality is. And I think those things truly are what make your story as unique as your DNA, because no one, got the same phrases from their grandparents that I did, or that, the funny things that your kids say that now become catchphrases in your family, those little things that are unique to your story are like, that's gold. Think about those things, the things that you say in a day that you don't think are unique or different, they are, and those are very fun things to include, in your storytelling, because they give it personality and often humor, and I think for anyone, humor and humanity is, and even admissions of the things that we think, even the comments that you've written, and the things that the voices in your head that try to keep you from saying what you need to say and what people need to hear, all of those things, people need to know that you think those things, because they think them too, and the things that you think you could never tell anyone are the very things that need to be told, because those are the things that people are going to be thinking, I thought I was the only one. And those are the things that make a story connect with people on an emotional level, when they think, oh, I thought I was the only one that thought that. And everyone's story is unique, but so many of the feelings that we have about ourselves and the challenges that we're trying to overcome have common threads, and people recognize those. And it's just such a symbiotic relationship between your uniqueness and your DNA and the human experience, which people can relate to, and most people don't relate to the success part of a story like they do the struggle. I don't know what it is about, humanity, but we all like to know that other people are suffering along with us or something, I guess. But, I always want to clean my story up. So I'm like, people are not going to want to listen to me if they realize what a idiot I am, or, how insecure I can be, or, how boring I feel. That's the message that I always struggle with. It's like, I'm not snazzy enough. I'm not, I don't have a big enough personality or something that to be interesting. And so I have to figure out, how to navigate my story and be me without trying to be, big like somebody else, but also realize that there's somebody out there that feels the same way, and that relates to that. So think about those things as you're telling your story, the things that you don't think you can tell, the things that you don't necessarily want people, it's not the card that you lead with usually. Those are often the things that people really love to read and love to listen to. One of the things that I think is important for telling story is thinking in your mind. I think we all have certain expectations. Like when I tell my story, what does success look like for me? Do I need to get 100 likes? Do I need to have, do I need to get on the bestseller list for it to have been worth doing, right? And I guess it's important to, think through what your definition of success for your storytelling is. But I would challenge you to say that if you have connected with one human being by telling your story, it was worth telling, because there's somebody in the world that relates and feels known or understood or somehow connects with what you're, where you're going. And that's worth having told it, because for us to tell our story, that will not happen. I mean, when you're telling your story with authenticity and you're telling it as colorfully as you can and know how, and you're focusing on that takeaway, it's amazing how people connect with it. But if you don't ever see the results of how many people connect with it, it was worth doing, and I can't emphasize that enough, because there are so many people who have told their stories on the internet, and I didn't even respond to it, but I still remember. I'm like, man, I'm so glad that person said that, because that's helping me figure out my way, through a challenge that I'm experiencing. So, you never really know, once you've let your story out in the world, you never really know how many people you're touching, how many lives you're impacting. And so that's kind of a trust fall when you tell your story. It's almost like a trust fall in that when you are authentically sharing your experiences, understanding that there is a ripple effect, is a powerful part of this process. And you'll see some of it, but you may never know how far the ripple goes when you begin to really honestly share your story. And I think when you're telling it, hoping to bring along new clients and things, that vulnerability that you have, the thing that makes it a little scary to tell, that's the very thing that helps people trust you and makes people feel like, okay, if they could say that, and if they experienced that moment that they just shared about their story, I can trust them and follow them, in their journey. So I do think that storytelling is it's a connection point, but it's also a way to earn trust and help people understand that you will understand their struggles, even if they're not the same struggles. Just the authenticity means that they can be authentic with you. And I think that's an important barrier to bring down.
Yeah, I'm going to just chime in there too and say, I think if we think about it in terms of like person to person versus being able to utilize something like social media, right? Like I'm thinking about when my mom and I went to this little mother-daughter luncheon before COVID happened, and we were sitting at this table of 8. It was all obviously mothers and daughters. And the first thing you're going to do in that situation where you don't know other people is you're going to try to find common ground, right? Like in an actual in-person situation, which I know none of us have had since approximately March 16th. But normally when we're with people, right, like the first thing we want to do is find common ground. Like, oh, you grew up in that town? I grew up 30 minutes away, right? Or we're trying to find common ground. And so, but on social media, it's not like that's not how we're conversing, right? Like that's not how we're sharing on social media. On social media, we're trying to create that common ground by us going a level deeper in our vulnerability, right? Like by sharing just a little bit of instead of just saying like, I lost 10 pounds and 6 inches, we're sharing how that made us feel. We're sharing that internal transformation, which then creates that connection with someone else, creates that vulnerability and trust. Does that make sense? So I just want to emphasize how important it is. I think maybe I just wrote down my own little note, just so I know for my own sake, like when we're sharing our story and we're sharing that state of where we were before, it's not just a descriptive, it's not just a description of environment, right? It's not just a description of, in that moment, you're not just describing the room, which you could be, or whatever. You're also describing how you were internally feeling, because that is going to be the ultimate connection point. I just heard a story recently. The guy was sharing his story, and he started his story off with the drama, which is interesting. I always feel it's kind of like what you were saying before. We call it a hook in marketing, right? Like something that will grab attention, or a headline or something like that. And he started off his story by saying like, I found myself in a situation where I couldn't feed my wife. That was the beginning of the story. So then you're like, well, I want to hear this story, right? Like I want to hear what's going on. So he's starting off with sort of the drama, but then he did a great job of describing his situation in a way that you really got to see, and as a man too, right? Like that extra level of vulnerability made you connect with him when he was sharing how, previous jobs had fallen through and they didn't have enough money to cover more than just one meal a day. They were sharing all this kind of stuff. But instead of just the tangible logistical pieces of the story, he was also sharing how that made him feel as a man to not be able to provide for his wife and not be able to have that situation. And that is what causes the connection. So I just wanted to say sometimes I think we confuse, like we think of social media as having to be this perfect place where we have the perfect story written out and whatever, but really it's in those flaws that a lot of times we make the connection. And letting those flaws be exposed and letting us sort of share a level deeper, especially when we share where we were before, I think that make that trust. So I just wanted to, again, pop in.
I'm so glad you did. Thank you. One of the things I do want to say, and this involves my own story, this will be an example to you of how people can connect with what you're doing, right? I can remember exactly where I was standing when I felt shame about food for the first time. I remember the moment, I remember who said it, I could recreate it, and I could tell you what I was eating. And those are moments that everybody, I don't know very many women who don't have some sort of body story or food story or, there's not, I don't know very many people, but especially women who have not had a moment like I've had. I can remember so many times feeling embarrassed. So embarrassed in gym class because I wasn't athletic. I wasn't chosen first, So, I would probably, not really lead with that card a lot of times, but that is the very part of my story that someone would connect with if I was on a health journey and I wanted to bring them along. And I am on a health journey, but I'm just not bringing people along necessarily. But, what you're doing is a very personal thing with people. And our bodies, it's a different kind of story when we're talking about the things that we believe about ourselves and our physical bodies. It's so personal. And I think that's kind of ramps up the importance for you to connect with that thing in people that fears that they can't do it or that doesn't see themselves as the person that they want to be. They think, I can't be that person that I want to be. I can't be that fit, energetic person, So they might very much trust the process more if they know that you've had a moment like that. Or, if you've always been fit, then maybe the story that you tell is a little bit different. But I do believe every person out there probably could deeply relate to the moments that caused you to want to do the journey that you're bringing people on. And the level of personal that story can be probably feels a little scary because, I know for almost every woman that I know, like if we get close enough and if our conversation goes deep enough, there's a story like mine. And I could tell many stories of, like body stories, health stories, and body image stories that people kind of need to know that they're not the only ones that have them, and that people that are doing really well and feeling really good, have had that story, and that gives them hope that they could end their story differently than maybe they think, So there's a hope that you give to people, even when you share the deeply vulnerable, difficult things, because you have chosen to move your life in a direction that doesn't stay stuck there in that part of the story. And so, yes, telling them before and that, recreating these moments of change, or like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't think that's true. Or, how do you overcome these voices that, that tell you, maybe you can't do it. The very thing that has made you a coach in a world where people are being their bodies and their minds are being transformed, the very thing that makes you a great coach will make you a great storyteller, because those things that you've had to dig into in order to get your health on track, everybody else is having to dig into that. So try to remember those moments that, that made you want to do this. because in the moments that you didn't think you could, because those are the moments that people are going to be like, okay, I can trust that person because they've had the same thought about their body or their experience that I have. And that's powerful. Once somebody understands that you've had that moment and you're in this place in your journey, it does give them hope. How are we doing? Do we have questions? Let me see. Somebody had to put a baby to bed, and I'm hoping this is helpful, but I would love to start sort of entertaining any questions that you might have. I can talk about this stuff all day, but I don't want it just to be one-sided. I want to hear any things that you're processing or questions that you're having. And I'll just give you a second if you want to type anything into the chat or unmute yourself and just pop in. If you want me to keep going, I will, but
well, I don't want to take over if anybody else wants to chime in, but I do want to I've been taking notes on everything you've said, and I just want to, sometimes I think it's nice to just pause and recap, and I think maybe even brainstorm some ideas on what they can take away. But I also wanted to just chime in and say this, that while there are a lot of different mediums that we can use as coaches, and that's exactly what I'm getting at, Michelle, and you can answer this too, Emily, but there's lots of options, right? We can blog, we can podcast, we can do Facebook, we can do Instagram, we can do TikTok, we can do whatever. And there's no necessarily wrong option. Obviously everybody has different personalities, so what works for one might not work for the other. But I will say that when it comes to storytelling, one of the things that I've heard from coaches is often, well, I start telling my story and then I just feel like it's so freaking long, nobody wants to read it, right? Or I delete it because it's just going on forever or whatever. And I wanted to just say, first of all, some of the best social media content that I've ever had that people have resonated most with, they see me at the grocery and they bring up a detail of my story from 2 weeks ago. Those types of posts are always long form posts. They are always what I feel like is a short novel, right? This is too long, nobody's going to read it, and they do. And in this marketing course that I'm taking, I was validated in that by the guy that's leading the course, told us that if storytelling is something that you're looking to do, right, which is we are as coaches, that's how we connect with people, Facebook is the best platform for that, because right now on Facebook, long form stories with just text are doing better than any other form of story, even photo, video, and all that. So just know that sharing your story, even if it doesn't have an exciting picture, even if you're not comfortable sharing a picture, even if you think it's too long, I don't necessarily think there's anything too long. I mean, sometimes, have you guys ever seen those posts that go viral and you find yourself in your bed at midnight and you're still reading it because it was so long? Yeah, and you're still going, right? It wasn't necessarily too long for you, right? So that's the first thing, is don't be afraid to write out your long story. But the other thing I was going to say, which I just thought of when you were talking, is when you were talking about how every woman has some sort of story, most likely connected to when they felt body shame or whatever. That's so true. Made me think of the story, for those of you guys who've read Untamed by Glennon Doyle. She has a little, I don't know if it's a whole chapter or just, I listened to it audibly, so I don't know, but somewhere in the beginning of the book, she shares a little story about her daughters and how they, with her girlfriends, and they're sitting around and they walk in the door and her son is there too. And they ask the question, are you guys hungry? And the little boys are like, yeah, sounds good. Let's eat some pizza. Sounds good. Right? They're just going off of that. They're hungry, they're going to eat. And the girls both look at each other and then they respond, no, or, and they say no. And so it's a really powerful moment in the story that she's telling, because you're picking up on the fact that from a very young age, these girls are already having to look at the other one to see if they're hungry before they admit that they are or aren't. And so, not to go into detail on that, but I'm so glad you brought that up, because something as small as that, we could see it as being too small and not interesting because it is societal norm, unfortunately. But even you just sharing that made me connect with you more, right? On this call. So I feel like those types of things are definitely things that we can be sharing. But it goes along with the fact that, what are the things that you're hearing from potential customers or existing customers as far as objections or complaints. I just had a girl today in my challenge group who said she always wanted to try home workouts, but she always had an idea in her mind of what they were. And in her mind, they were in some way body shaming. And she was worried about like the female trainers. She was talking specifically about like some female trainers kind of intimidated her because she was worried it was going to be all about the body and all about how you look and all of that, right? So I'm hearing this from her as a challenger, and she just came on board. I've been a coach for 10 years, but I've known her the whole 10 years, right? But she just came on board now, and she's like, wow, now that I'm doing it, I'm realizing these are awesome. Like these workouts are awesome, and they're not what I thought, right? So that to me, it goes in the back of my brain as content. Like that's something for me that I should then be talking about and addressing on my social media, like disclaiming those thoughts, right? So the things that we're hearing from people are also things that we can be sharing a story about in a way that connects, right? A story about how I maybe used to think that too, or whatever, right? So I just wanted to say, a lot of times we're like, I don't have anything to talk about, or I don't have anything to share. But it's like, you either have pieces of your story and moments to share, or you can take those common objections and common thoughts that you're hearing from your challengers and turn that into content too, because that will connect with other people. You can tell the stories of them as well.
Yes.
So I just wanted to, again, I'm just the interrupter. You can call me the interrupter, but anybody else, feel free to unmute. Tracy, you're unmuted. Go for it.
I was just sitting here thinking, and I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I feel like I don't have the most glamorous beginning to my story. I've got a big old middle, and I have an unfinished ending, right? Like I don't have the shiny ending where I have like 6-pack in my life together. My life isn't together. I don't have the 6-pack. I don't, right? And so sometimes I feel like because I don't look like Autumn Calabrese, or I'm not a 5-star diamond coach or a life coach or whatever, that I don't know how to tell that story and still say, oh, and by the way, I'm also still a hot mess. But that, so I know people still need to hear that, but sometimes I struggle with like, kind of like what we've been talking about with coaching, and just that like, you don't have to have your journey together to help other people. I get that. But sometimes I don't know how to tell my story when I'm still working on it all.
I get that.
Does that make sense? It's a little
Yeah,
random.
it makes 100% sense. We're all works in progress. If we waited until our story was done to tell it, we would all be too dead to tell it. You know, we have to tell it from where we are, you know. And I mean, I love that you're saying that you're a hot mess, but you're so much farther along than you were at some point, you know. And you think about where you've come, and take us back to that and show the progress. You know, even in AA, I mean, I've not been through AA. I highly respect people who have been, and I love the principles of it. But one of the guiding principles is that we always strive for progress, not perfection. And progress is what people need to know is possible. They know perfection isn't possible. It's not, you know, I mean, we can get as near as we can, you know, to perfection. But if we wait until, or we think that we have to wait until we're at this, like some plateau to tell the story, we'll realize that we'll always be waiting. And I had this, my sister and I had this moment when we were in our 30s. She's 5 years younger than I am. And I remember she called me on her birthday and she was like, I thought I would have my act together by now. And I was like, well, I'm 5 years older and I thought I would have my act together. I think everybody feels this way. I don't think anybody ever has their act together, you know, like we think they do, you know. So when you feel like a work in progress, just know that we all feel that way. And so, you know, maybe the before, during, and after isn't the finished product, because, you know, that may still be in the future, but, you know, it's a part of the process that you're in, you know. So you know, before, during, and progress maybe is maybe a better way to say it, you know, because after can feel like something that we're not at yet. So if you have to replace after with progress, that's a good way to navigate it for yourself, because we're really truly all just in a different place in progress in a million different areas of life, you know. And I guarantee you, I'm sorry, somebody else.
Oh, no, I was going to say, Emily, one of the things that stood out to me when you did the storytelling was you talked about how even sharing your story, even if you think it's still a mess, sometimes it will allow other people to borrow your bravery for them to find their voice. And I've incessantly since that. And, you know, even just speaking up or being active about something, you never know the ripple effects that it might allow somebody else to be confident enough after hearing what you've shared to share their own story.
100%. Yeah. When you say too, Tracy, I wanted to go back to something that I heard you say. You said the beginning of my story wasn't very glamorous. I mean, that's gold. There's all kind of gold in there. So, you know, what you think isn't glamorous is part of the fertile ground that grew the Tracy that you're becoming. And so there's all this stuff, you know, there in your mind that doesn't feel glamorous. It doesn't feel extraordinary. And those are the very things that have made you who you are and have given you strength and have given you perspective. And, you know, that's true for every one of us, you know, that whatever, you know, however things started out for you, you know, those are the things that have helped you get the skills that you had to become what you are now, you know, even if it didn't seem glamorous, even if it wasn't, even if it was really, really hard, that's the stuff that has given you grit to get here, you know, and a lot of people need to hear that. Anybody else got a, let me see, I'm going to the chat here just to see if there's, see, Jenny kind of talked about the how long is too long when creating stories for social. Truly, I think people do read the long form. So I think we answered that, but if there's more there, let me know. And there was a discussion about the time of day. Jenny says weekends, evenings and weekends are good for sharing on social media. Sarah, you unmuted. Do you have anything to?
Yeah, I was kind of, when it comes to storytelling and it comes to like social media, I was just curious, like if there was like I know you don't want every post to be some sort of storytelling. Is there like some sort of way to create it to where people are like, oh God, Sarah's here telling her long story again, to make it where people are still intrigued and wanting to come back and see? Is there some sort of format that kind of helps people, like for us to be sharing our story so we're not overdoing it or getting people where we're saying it so much it's falling on deaf ears and people are like, oh, just another post from Sarah about her fitness, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
I'm just curious if you're
Yeah, first of all, I want you to say, and it's just another post from Sarah. I want you to just stick that in your mental little jar that because no one's thinking that, you know, when you tell your story, you know, you have this critic that says, you know, that people are not going to want to hear it. And they probably do. And, but some things that you can do to keep it mixed up for yourself so that you don't feel like it's the same thing as you know, tell the moments. Maybe there's a funny moment, you know, maybe there's humor, maybe there's, you know, a really tender moment with your mom and it's Mother's Day. And so that can relate, you know, sometimes using, you know, holidays and birthdays and things like that to sort of, you know, keep your story sort of on on topic for what's going on in the world, or, you know, recreate a moment that reminds people of, you know, this quarantine, or, you know, those kind of keep it mixed up, you know, so it's, and you're not having to you don't tell the same story over and over again. You can just tell those different pieces of it that all strung together, people kind of get a feel for your journey. But I don't think anybody's going to be like, oh no, another post from Sarah. I mean, for you to write it, you know, it can be hard, you know, to bring up a memory and write about it. So I highly recommend journaling to kind of call to memory some stories that you maybe had forgotten about, and from those journals, you might come up with a lot of really cool angles so that it doesn't, and some you may maybe mix up the length, maybe there's a shorter one that you can tell if the last one you posted was a longer one. And, Jenny, I know you guys probably have things that you talk about as far as frequency and like staying in front of people and things like that. So feel free to chime in here as far as your angle on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a lot of times coaches think that their story is like that they have one story and that it's usually they think that their story is just their physical transformation, right? Because that's what Beachbody as a corporation showed us, right? Like the Beachbody Challenge, like the whole company used to be called $1 Million Body, right? Which is the whole idea was you get in shape, you earn money by getting in shape, right? And so what, of course, did they put in the front of everyone's minds? Before and afters. So from the get-go, when you start with Beachbody, right, you start in a challenge group, you start with the health and fitness, and before and afters and your story sort of becomes this, in my opinion, misnomer. Like, I can't even think of the last time I shared my before and after. I don't even know if I could find it. I think it's on my old computer. Like, I think it's been years since I shared it. And so I'm not saying that that doesn't work. I know that there are coaches that leverage their physical transformation to get people to act. To me, it is a infomercial style way of, I'll say, selling. I think what I'm hoping to teach you with Emily and with storytelling is by sharing our internal transformations and by thinking about all of the different moments that describe who we were before this opportunity, I think that is money, right? And I think it's because here's the thing. If I wanted to sell challenge packs galore and hit Success Club 50, I would be sharing the crap out of just nothing but before and after physical transformations, right? Just like when I owned my gym, right? Like I could have done a lot of things to bring people into the gym, but I'll be honest, after 5 years of owning that gym, I no longer wanted to work with people who just wanted to give me money and not do the work, who didn't have an internal reason to keep going and to make their goals happen and to transform. And so I would rather help 5 to 10 who are having an internal transformation, who are connecting with me and forming that trust and connection, who are like, okay, I'm all in, right? And that's what storytelling can do, because you are building that trust so quickly through vulnerability. And so Sarah, I would encourage you, Sarah has a really powerful story and backstory. But here's the thing I know about you, Sarah, like if, and we're good friends, so I can say this, right? Like, so if Chris were to say to me in the other room, like if he didn't know Sarah, right? If he was like, tell me about this Sarah girl who's on your calls, like he knows who she is, but let's just say he said that. And I told him, I could tell him your story. And I'll say that the story I would tell him would be like your brochure story, right? Like I know your physical transformation. I know your background with drugs and alcohol. I know how you came into Beachbody and what it has meant for you. However, I don't think I could point to, I can think of one story that you shared about like a friend overdosing and that being a moment for you, right? But aside from that, like I can't think of a lot of moments that you've shared that have put me in your shoes. And so I think in our minds, we're thinking, gosh, I'm telling the same story every week. Like, and that story in our head is 10 years ago, right? My story, right? 10 years ago, I started with P90X and Shakeology, had migraines, and we go into it, right? But it's so surface level and it's so just external transformation. And I think what I'm hoping to really nail down is let's instead look at just these itty bitty moments that are part of our story that can really connect because they're a layer deeper. So I think as a prompt, because I know some of you guys are like, give me a prompt, that'll help me think, right? Instead of saying, I'm going to sit down and share my story tonight in a way that connects, I would rather you say to yourself, tonight, I'm going to zero in on a moment that made me feel like blank. And it could be as simple as, right, what are the most common objections you get, right? I don't think I have time to work out and pay attention to healthy eating. I'm just giving you an example, right? So the objective, or as Emily said, your takeaway for the purpose of this post tonight would be, how can I help someone have an epiphany, right, about how they can have time and they can make the time? What is a moment in my life where I've had to make time, where I've had to make this a priority? And then just tell that story. Does that make sense? And that story, and then tomorrow night, it could be a story about something else. And the next night, it's a story about, and you could fill 365 days a year before you have to recycle a story, because you have that many stories in your life. I shared a story years ago, like probably 8 years ago. I shared a story on social media about my migraine journey. And I shared the detail of having to carry the little blue Trexamet prescription pill in my pocket, loosely in my pocket, so that we could do things like go to Colts games and be newlyweds.
Jenny, I thought about that story yesterday.
Yeah.
I kid you not.
Yeah. I've only posted it one time, and you would think that I shared that story 100 different times because of the number of people that mentioned that to me, because for whatever reason that connected with them, right? So zero in on a moment, zero in on a detail, and you're again, the end goal is to create an epiphany for the person on the other end to say, wow, like I really trust her more, or I really feel like I'm in that position, or I really feel like I could make a change too. So I don't want to get too detailed into that, but I think, don't think about your before and after all the time. Don't think about just your story. Again, my challenge to everybody is try to write out your story or a story in a way that doesn't involve Beachbody product, and settle in on a moment.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, because even those who never even, they never do the first step with Beachbody will still be inspired by the story and will still be better for it, I love that. Let me see, I'm just making sure that if anybody else has. Okay, so Abby. Been struggling with my story isn't relevant, adding to an important conversation, hesitation in our current climate. Do you want to, I'd love to hear more about sort of the relevancy of it. Are you talking about your Beachbody story, or in general your experiences? Okay, she's trying to get to a place where she can talk, where she can unmute. It's okay if you can't, but I'd love to hear more. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, sorry. My daughter and her friend had just walked up on the deck a few minutes ago. So.
Okay, sorry. And I didn't mean to call you out if you weren't ready to talk, but I would love to hear more about sort of that hesitation that you're feeling.
Well, just in general, Beachbody is a big part of it. I mean, like Jenny was saying, like, I don't necessarily have to use the names and titles, but it's going to play a major role in it anyway. But I just don't want to add noise, I guess. I'm struggling with adding unnecessary noise. And it feels a little selfish to talk about myself.
Yeah.
That's it.
I understand that. I struggle with that, honestly. And, but every time I do, let that guard down and just say, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to take the risk and do it. It always does connect. My husband and I started a podcast when I went freelance and I had the time to edit podcasts. We did, we kind of launched a series of podcasts because, I grew up in church and I saw some really unkind behavior in my story. So I remember somewhere along the way feeling like, I really feel like, I want to speak to some of the things that I've seen, and I want to challenge people to think differently about our fellow humans, and to treat people better, very, very much so. So we started a podcast called Love Better. And, we were just basically saying, in our journey, it has become important to us to understand that everybody's going through something. And as we walk through our lives, to that everybody is struggling and needs to feel kindness and compassion. And that shouldn't be a matter of like, they have to meet some sort of moral bar or something in order for us to be kind to them. And in some of the environments I have been in, that's been the case. So we did the first, like, I don't know, I can't remember, probably at least 12 podcasts. And we just were not getting any traction. We were just like, has anybody been listening? I don't know. And we would get some, comments about it and stuff. And finally I was like, I think we need to tell our story. So we basically just told the whole story, like why you even did this thing, like Love Better, and immediately after posting it, we were getting people, emailing saying, I'm crying. I relate so much. I wish we could just sit down and have coffee and, all this stuff. And it was basically telling the story of, growing up in church and seeing terrible, behavior and seeing my dad have to resign his church because people were kind of like blackmailing. And it was just, one of those moments where I thought it's all about story. Nobody cares about, what we're doing until they figure out why we're doing it, and I think, Abby, for you, if it's a human story, it's relevant, and I think, I love Jenny's idea of telling it without necessarily having to bring in products. Cause I know the hesitation, you don't want to be self-promoting and, those kinds of things. And I definitely struggle with that because I don't want anybody to feel that I have an agenda like that. I'm telling you my story and I'm being vulnerable because I want to get something back, but it does earn trust. And so there is this, for me, this importance of continuing to put it out there. And I have to challenge myself all the time to get over that barrier of like, is it good? Is it going to connect? Because I am like you, I don't want to add to the noise and just be another thing that's floating out there, but somebody out there probably needs to hear that they're not the only ones that have felt the way that you have felt, and all I can say is that when I've dared to do it, I wasn't sorry, and people connected in a big way. And I can try 10 other ways and not be vulnerable. And it's just like going out into, Never Never Land when I post it. But when I put story in there, there is something really unique that happens. So I'd encourage you to, and I would say, I really highly recommend journaling if you aren't sure what story to tell. And we're talking story, but we really mean stories. There's so many stories in our lives, the ones that your relatives tell around the Thanksgiving dinner, table, or at least that ours did. Thanksgiving dinner table, a lot of times the same stories are told and they just become so part of your family story that you don't realize that they're unique, like think about some of those, the stories of your family, the stories of your experiences, your relationships, and what of those things have made you or prompted you to be on the journey that you're on. And sometimes those little things that seem insignificant or like noise to you is not noise at all. I would say the word noise might want to go onto one of these and into your mouse jar, because you're any true honest story isn't noise. It's powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would just say, I was going to say this earlier and I forgot, but this made me think of it. So my almost 4-year-old, who apparently doesn't like sleep, has been, there's two things that made me think of her when you were saying that, Abby. So obviously we put our dog down about a month, I guess it's been over a month ago, our good old Rudy boy. And she's been really struggling with that. Like every few days, she just, has a meltdown over it. And then we all have a meltdown over it and whatever. But she has been so even as not even 4 years old, right? Like she's so already becoming so, what's the word? Engrossed with stories. And so she'll say to us, like she'll get into one of those moments and she'll be like, Mama, can you tell me a story? She'll say, can you, and what she's asking is, can you tell me a story about Rudy? So we've told her these funny stories about how he peed in the air vent and how, you know, whatever, all these funny things that he did as a puppy. And so I see it the same way. Like social media right now is nothing but political, COVID, Black Lives Matter, everything, right? Like that's what it is. But, you know, not to sound, this is apparently my life because I'm going to get real preschool on y'all, but she loves Daniel Tiger. And when we put Rudy down that day, Chris and I were just a hot mess. And at the end of the day, we were just like, just get her to bed, just get through this day. It's a horrible day. And she knew we were upset. And she goes, Mama, she said, close your eyes and think of something happy. And that's a Daniel Tiger thing. Close your eyes and think of something happy, right? You're welcome for that little jingle. And it's so true, right? Like, so the way you're feeling is how everyone is feeling on social media. They feel like everything is dark, everything is depressing, right? And so to me, we have this almost responsibility to continue to be a light and to tell the happy stories so that when people are scrolling, there's something positive there. So if someone's going to hate on it, you know, they're not your people anyway. But to me, I almost feel an obligation to say, even though I don't feel like it right now, even though I'd rather make a post about, you know, getting into all this, like today I was almost caught up in writing a post about going back to school. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. Like, I'm not going to like give in to everybody else and the way they're thinking, right? Instead, I'm going to do something positive and be a light. So I think come back to that phrase, right? Like close your eyes and think of something happy. Don't look at what everybody else is sharing. Don't look at the darkness. Pull out the light because people need that.
I love that. See, I'm looking at the comments here. Lori had to hop off. So I thought it might be fun to just take a few minutes and sort of brainstorm some ideas for you to write your story. And so, you know, anybody can pop in or type in the chat screen. Even if it's a little chaotic, I would love to start you thinking. I want you to leave this call thinking of some specific moments that you can tell, you know. And so how to do that, I'm thinking, okay, often turning points, like you mentioned earlier the story of, you know, just that there was the friend who overdosed and there was the turning point, and it was like, okay, that was a big moment. So thinking in your mind of turning points that you've been at and you're like, I could either go this way or this way, and you went this way and your story ended up differently because of it. So think about turning points. Think about the moment that you felt the best about yourself or the worst about yourself, like the best and worst. Think about the best Christmas you've ever had. Think about the hardest Christmas you had. What made it hard? What was it about it? You know, is there something that you can glean from that now that you couldn't at the time? I'm trying to think of just, you know, prompts for you to start thinking about these little moments. Like maybe there was a childhood moment that has formed something, some attitude or some turn in your story or the way that you were thinking. I'd also love to think about relationships, that sometimes relationship changes or a relationship loss. Those can be moments that they create those moments of, like, you know, self-realization, sometimes, you know, having to kind of fight your way back after the loss of someone or the loss of a relationship. Those are all the kinds of moments that can get you started. It can also be as insignificant as being in the store and reading a label for the first time and realizing what you were eating, or, you know, it can be those, you know, the everyday moments where you were grocery shopping. Anybody, does this prompt any other brainstormy teeny moments? I'm trying to help you think of your story in like little teeny increments that you could share. Just giving you a second to think. Maybe a financial story. I think the one that you were sharing earlier, Jenny, about the person who couldn't, you know, they were having trouble, you know, having enough to eat. Those moments are very difficult to talk about, but very effective, because many people have been in that boat and nobody wants to talk about that. So a moment when you had zero money, or, you know, felt like you didn't have options, and how that felt and how it feels now to have options, you know, or if you're mid in that process and you're still fighting, but you're making progress. What are those moments that are helping you get through those speed bumps that you go through when you're on a learning curve and on a journey? Just trying to throw out some possibilities. Think about vignettes. So sometimes when somebody's writing a book, I suggest that they not tell their whole story chronologically. I say, you know, give us a scene, and then another scene, and then another scene, and they all hook together, but you don't have to hook them together, you know. And that's the beauty of social media, is that you can take vignettes as sort of a great way to think about, you know, how to communicate important parts of your story. Forks in the roads, you know, crisis moments. I think about historical moments. So 9/11, you know, a lot of times people remember exactly where they were, you know. So, you know, historical moments, when you're on the calendar year, sometimes it's effective to tell a story about that historical moment. The first time you, like Juneteenth was a big historical moment that a lot of people weren't aware of this year. So a lot of people were telling stories like, you know, that I celebrated the first time this year because of, you know, I knew what this holiday was. And, you know, so, you know, maybe even look at your calendar and look at holidays and think, okay, what were some standout moments around the holiday schedule? I'm also thinking of, like Jenny said, with the migraines, you know, if there were specific battles, you know, recreate one of those experiences, one of those days, like recreate a day for us. You know, what was it like to be you at that point? And it's easy when you've made so much progress to forget the struggle that was there before, you know. If you ever journaled in the past, sometimes you can find a lot of fodder for storytelling in your journals from years past, even on your social media feed. You know how it does the timeline. So you can sometimes go to your social media feed and think, okay, wow, 8 years ago, this picture popped up and my life's in a totally different place right now. That happened to us today. Our kids were like, you know, 9 years ago, we had a picture of them in Jackson Hole, and we just got back from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and they're adults, and we had this wonderful time with them. They were in 8th and 10th grade at that point, you know, and we were just remembering that phase of life, and whoa, I almost forgot about when they were teenagers, and you know, here we are. So, you know, sometimes going through your Facebook feed can be a fun way to brainstorm ideas for stories that you could tell, moments you could recreate. Is this bringing, let me see, I'm reading the comments. Sorry, I don't mean to trail off. Oh, wow. Being a mom. That's cool. That would be an important one to tell. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think another thing too is like not just, I like the prompts you gave us. Like when did I feel the best about myself? When did I feel the worst about myself? What was it like to be me before? And I think ultimately, like, most of us can probably pinpoint a moment where our thought process or our beliefs changed. So not to zero in, I mean, obviously we can tell our story in a lot of different regards, but for the sake of Beachbody, there's a moment where our beliefs changed, right? And ultimately that's what we're trying, not necessarily trying to always do, because we're just looking to influence people. But if we're building this as a business, we're looking at it as like, how can we help change others' beliefs too, right? Like how can we, so what was the moment that your beliefs changed? Like, I know for me, I can point to multiple. Like for me, it was like, I tried everything with modern medicine, everything, acupuncture, 4 neck surgeries. I did Botox for migraine. I did it all. And I was basically all in on modern medicine, right? And I can remember that the moment that my thoughts or potential beliefs changed was when I had a very, very close friend tell me, don't throw in the straw, don't throw in the towel. You've got to see a functional medicine doctor. And I can remember that exact moment, and what's the word I'm looking for? The resistance that I wanted to put up to that. But also the fact that I had tried everything else. So it was a moment of like giving in, and that led to belief changes for me. That's just a small example, right? Or I also believed when I started with this, there was no way I would never be a network marketer. I didn't ever want to be a network marketer. I had this perception in my mind of what it was. I didn't want to have home parties. I didn't want to have product in my garage. I didn't want to, all that stuff. I had all these things, but there was a moment my belief changed. And for me, it was when I met another coach in my local area who was just crushing it and had such a huge ripple effect on other people. Like other people were starting to not just lose weight, but their confidence was changing. And it was just, I could see the impact that she was making. And for me, there was a moment, I can remember it. We were at McAllister's Deli. We were having lunch together. We were supposed to be a business consultation thing. And I was kind of thinking about working the business, but I had all these misconceptions, and it had nothing to do with what she told me in that moment. It had everything to do with me seeing the impact she made and making a switch in my brain say, I can do this too. It was a belief change. And so my encouragement to you when we're talking about prompts is not just thinking about like, okay, what was life like before? What was the moment when a belief changed for you, and zero in on that? Because again, that's meeting the potential customer where they are now. That's the absolute best thing we can do, is meet them where they are.
I think too, it might, and this is from another angle, it might be helpful for someone to see when you are leveling up personally, like if you're on this journey, you're teaching other people how to be on this journey, but then maybe is there a moment where you're like, man, I blew it, or I'm not sure I want to do it today, or how do you keep motivated? What keeps you in the game, when your defenses are down, when you're tired? I liked what Jenny said earlier about how you make, how do you make time? Those are things that everybody's going to draw from, say, oh, okay, so it isn't easy, but here's how, my friend, my coach, or, even my Facebook friend that I haven't seen 20 years, when you're telling your story to someone, it's inspiring to them to see that you aren't perfect maybe, but still on the journey and still pushing forward. And how do you do that? How do you keep moving forward and leveling up? And that helps people understand that it's not perfection that we're striving for. Okay, help me know what I haven't shared that you need to know. Like when you get off the call and you are going to say, oh shoot, I wish I had said this or asked that. Are you feeling overwhelmed at all? Anyone feeling overwhelmed? I hope not. I hope it feels doable.
I just want to say, I think the concept of the moments really helped me, because even for like the first half an hour, 40 minutes, I was kind of still stuck in the like, I tell my story. My story's not exciting. Like, I had a baby and I couldn't teach at the club anymore, so I did Beachbody. And it's just, I was in better shape before I did Beachbody, to be honest. And I had babies and things have been messed up since then. So, I was kind of struggling with that, but thinking of like those specific moments. Like, I remember sitting on the floor being absolutely desperate for something to get rid of this mom bod I had after having my first baby. And, I remember I was able to jot down some notes of, those moments. And so that really kind of helped me change my thinking from, I don't have a story, I don't know what to share, to, okay, I can get behind like that one. I know there are other moms who feel that way. I know there are people who feel, here I am right now, probably in the worst shape, not worst shape, but I'll go ahead, probably the worst weight I've been at since being with Beachbody, and I'm fighting other battles, and, just that roller coaster ride, I think a lot of people can relate to. So that just helped me thinking about feelings and moments.
Good.
Yeah, I think a lot of people start coaching with Beachbody and they all of a sudden it's like, they're like, well, I don't look like The Rock, so therefore, it's like those inner critic voices just start going at you, not just about your story, but everything. So
there's so many reasons to do it,
Mm-hmm.
It's so much of the internal strength that you're getting and the internal journey that gets an external result, but if people can understand the internal battle that you're having to do every day, that is relatable.
Yeah. I know for me, sometimes I struggle with, I think we call some types of messaging, we call call to action, right? So like there's a story followed by a call to action. Like I'm going to share this piece of my life with you, and then I'm going to call you to act and join me, right? And for me, when I'm sitting down to write a call to action that involves a story, I feel like I've done it enough, like I've practiced this enough that I can kind of figure out how to wrap all that up into a post. But when I'm just sharing pieces of my story, which I've shared occasionally I'll share something about like our adoption story with Ellery or whatever. I always feel like I don't necessarily know how to close, like, or that's kind of what you were talking about before, right? Like if we don't have a destination in mind, you can go on forever.
Sure.
But sometimes like once I start writing, the destination changes or whatever. And one thing that I had shared with the mentorship group that I was just going to say here, and then if you have any tips on that, that'd be super. But one thing that I was a writing major in college, and I started probably close to my senior year picking up on the fact that I almost always started everything with the ending. Like, and it's not necessarily bad, but I've found that like sometimes just copy and pasting my post and literally splitting it in half and flip-flopping it makes the world so much easier. Makes people understand it so much better. So I just wanted to say, like, sometimes if you feel like you're like going on and you're like, how do I wrap this up? How do I finish it? Consider changing the order of what you've already written, and most likely it could close itself. It's kind of fascinating because you're like, oh yeah, this, because you get into it, right? Like as you're going, you're like, oh, now I'm in it. Now I know what I'm sharing. Now I know. But sometimes a lot of people are like, I've even got messages from some of you that are like, can you help me finish this? Like, can you help me wrap it up? Right. So what would your 2 cents be on closing a story kind of powerfully, right? Like if we're going to share this on social media, what's a good way to powerfully close the story? Whether it's to inspire action or not, like even if it's just for the sake of storytelling.
Sure. The most important things you'll do are the first and last of the story, like how you begin and how you end really are the bookmarks that, make it feel solid. So I love that question. And I do think that, if you have the end in mind at the beginning, that's great. I have at times, if I knew I needed to write about something, there have been times where I just needed to free write and get it out, and then go to a second process, which is just pulling out anything that that I needed to say it to get to the story, but it doesn't need to be part of what I share. You know what I mean? So there's almost like a brain dump that you can do. And that sometimes that's how you figure out the takeaway. You know, sometimes you have to write to the takeaway. If you just like something's, you know, you're like, I've got all these memories, or I've got this moment, I think I need to sometimes just start writing. I think, you know, if you wait until it's solid, all the way solid in your head, you never start. I would never have written anything in my whole life if I thought, I know exactly everything I'm going to say right now. I have to write to it sometimes. Then when you actually share it, you know, give it the edited version, the version that says, okay, now that's all the stuff that went through my mind. How much of this will help people see what I need them to see, or what I'm trying to help them see? So you might have a paragraph that's really good, but you really only need one sentence in that paragraph, and it might be the last sentence because you needed to write to it, you know? So I would say sometimes it's very helpful to just create a document, and I had to just learn that just to start writing was probably the biggest hump to get over, just to stop thinking about it and just open a document. No big deal. I'm just going to start writing, and it's going to be dog crap, and it's going to be just blah. And I don't have any expectation for that. And then sometimes that is where the story begins to formulate. And then I realize that's what this is about. So then you begin to edit it into the thing that you're going to share. And that's the thing that you take all the gold sentences out of the brain dump that you just did. And that's all the stuff that is like the meatiest stuff. But you may not need all the sentences that you had to write to get to it. You know what I mean? So I would say definitely if you just open Facebook and start to write, you may end up with a less concise version of what your story could be, or what would be have the most clarity. Sometimes it's good to just open a document and sort of, you know, get it. I love this. I wish that you could dictate accurately in the shower. Yes. I mean, so many great ideas come in the shower, and then I go to write it. I'm like, whoa, that was such a good idea. Where did it go? I totally relate to that.
They do make waterproof or whatever whiteboards. I have one in my shower. You can judge me all you want.
Oh, I think it's brilliant.
No, they have these, they're like little whiteboard sheets. They're like Post-its, and they come with a little pencil, and you can write on them in the water. It's fantastic. That's actually how we came up with Ellery. Part of the way we came up with Ellery's name was we wrote it out like multiple ways before she was born. We wrote it like 4 different spellings. So we had it in front of us all the time in the shower, and then we would just like, we finally were like, this is the one.
I love that.
But yeah. So, hey, Jackie, I just wanted to say really quick, when it comes to like a call to action post like this, I feel like this I've gotten sort of better at because I've done it for so long, but I love following the format of that hook story offer, which is the hook is essentially what's going to grab attention, whether it's a photo or headline, or maybe you pull out, like she said, maybe you pull out a sentence of your story that's a real powerful punch, and that's at the top, and then you come back to it later, right? Those tend to be powerful posts. But then when it's a call to action, it's really, in my opinion, easier, because then you can transition into, and here's how I can help you do the same, right? Type thing. Like, these are all the things I offer, right? Like meal plans, grocery lists, this is how I'm going to help you do this or that. Like, you take your story that's maybe overcoming those objections, and then you show like, you're not going to have these objections because this is what I have to offer, right? That's, to me, that's marketing lingo, and that feels more comfortable. But when we're just telling our story for the sake of telling the story, or for the sake of creating that vulnerability and trust with people, which is also just as important, that's, I hear you. That's where I struggle sometimes too. It's like, how do I wrap this up? Or what if my takeaway changes, right? Like, what if the epiphany I want them to have is now different because I'm writing and I'm basically journaling on Facebook. So yeah. I totally understand that, like, which could be why the journaling helps, because you're getting all that out in the journal, and then you can sort of
tone it down,
validate and condense that into something powerful in a post.
For sure. If I publish every first draft that I did, no one would ever think that I'm a good writer at all. there's so many things that I have to get out of my brain as I'm writing to get it out of the way so that, you know, you can get to those good meaty things. And I think that's probably true for most people.
Yeah.
Jackie dreams of having a shower long enough to write. Yeah, I understand that too. People banging at the door and yeah.
My 1-year-old learned how to open the door.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's a hard day.
And my 4-year-old decides she loves showering. So it's like,
Oh no, yeah.
it's all good. I don't really like showering myself, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's highly over.
3-4 days, whatever.
Exactly.
When I actually have to go back to work, things are not going to be pretty.
That's why I love dry shampoo.
I'm telling you, living proof dry shampoo. It's a game
Love
changer.
the stuff. I'm out right now and I'm dying.
Yeah.
I've trained this. We're at like 6-7 days. All right.
Yeah.
I love it.
I had someone tell me, so I had my haircut last week, and I said to her, I haven't washed my hair in like 4 days. I said, I just dry shampooed it after my workout. Because usually my inner battle is always, well, I'm just going to work out tomorrow. Like, and so
True. I'm putting a hat on. Why bother?
So
Yeah.
my hairstylist was like, oh, that's all right. Like most women, by the time when they come in to see her, she's like, they've gone like 6-7 days, sometimes 14 days. I'm like, how do you go? It's like my head starts to itch after like 5 days. Like I can't go longer than like 4 or 5 days. Total side note, but
yeah. Oh yeah, I feel that.
I know that we want to be respectful of your time, and I know that people are hopping off, obviously, because they have things to do and kids to get to bed and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to do a quick recap on things, especially some of my takeaways. Not that anybody needs to hear my takeaways, but in case it helps. First of all, I just wanted to say I wrote down just as a general framework for sharing our story that digging into the before and the during, right? Like who was I before and what was my struggle like? Those are the areas of our story that are going to connect the most. But I think most of us are probably doing the opposite, and we're telling too much about the after, right? Like, and we're not zeroing in on those moments. So the framework is choose a moment from before your epiphany, right? And use the 5 senses to describe that moment, with your end goal to be connecting with the person on the other end through your struggle. I think that's a great framework that will get us started. And to me, it's business changing and it's game changing, right? Like, I mean, you guys know, like Beachbody Corporate likes to teach us all the ways to be rock stars on Instagram and have the best pictures and do the best stories. When I say stories, I mean Instagram stories, and, you know, message people. And here's a script you can use to invite people to your challenge group and all that stuff. But I've built my business successfully using Facebook and stories, like telling stories, connecting with people. And it feels authentic. And the one thing I hear from most people is, I don't want to be salesy. I don't want you to be salesy either. I came into the business the exact same way. And so for me, it's like, but if I can share my story and if I can connect with other people that might have a similar story, then I can make a true impact, right? And that impact is going to be impactful to me as well. So I wrote down a few of you should have these made into little quotes, Emily, and I'm going to make them for you and send them to you.
Do it.
Some truth bombs for us. I wrote down, if we all waited too long to tell our story, we'd all be too dead to tell it. So good. Progress is what people need to know is possible, not perfection. Mm-hmm. Help others borrow your bravery to find their voice. That was good. I'm glad Jen chimed in with that one. Mm-hmm. What you didn't think was glamorous is what makes up the fertile ground that grew you to who you were becoming. That's huge. So good.
True of every single person.
Yeah. Okay. Final thought is, if you feel like you're stuck and you're like, I'm talking about like a week from now, 2 weeks from now, whatever, you're like, oh, I got to circle back. Stop thinking about your physical transformation. Start thinking about internal transformation and the moments that made up who you were before. But also, if you're not doing personal development, if you're not reading something every day or listening to audio every single day, that's when you can really get stuck. Like when I'm in a routine where I listen to something positive, or especially now, right? Abby was talking about like the darkness that is social media right now. You can get caught up in that and then feel like you don't have anything important to say or you don't have light to share. But when you're in a positive space and you're listening to positive things through Audible or podcasting, or you're reading a book or whatever, your thoughts and your memories start to flow. And those little moments are what we should be sharing. Those are the little stories that we can pull from. I know when I just finished Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I'm reading a couple other books right now. She has just a phenomenal writing style.
Yes.
Regardless of whether you believe the things that she believes or not, like, her writing style is fantastic. And so, but I think she does that. Think about that. That whole book is literally, the chapters are moments.
Mhm.
Every single chapter in that book is a moment,
Mhm.
right? So it's just and I told my husband, I'm like, I love this book because it's all short stories, right? And that's what people want to hear. They want to hear the short stories. They want to hear the moments. So this was so helpful, Emily, and I'm so grateful that you took your time to help us with this. I'm sorry we couldn't have done it live like we were hoping to do.
Oh, I know. I would love to be in the room with everyone. I regret that we couldn't be in the same room, but thank you for having me.
Yeah, but given the times, at least we have Zoom.
Yeah,
So,
option.
so tell Scott I said hello, and again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And really quickly though, just so it's on the recording too, and I can share this in the team page, how can people connect with you on social or follow you or follow your podcast? Can you give us some details on?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Emily Sutherland on Instagram, Facebook, and Love Better World is at Love Better World is our Love Better project that we do. It's our little love project that we really just talk about how we can take care of each other as human beings. And that's on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, but I'm probably not going to be on Twitter that much. I don't live on Twitter. It's Instagram more than the other socials. Love Better does have a Facebook page, and lovebetter.world is our URL, and that's where our content lives. We have blogs and videos there that kind of share just some of the stories and interviews with people about, just how we can take care of each other in the world. So, and my email for anybody that wants to delve into more of the in-depth storytelling day that we do, you can email me if you're interested, and I'll be in touch as far as a date, and we can talk about, your availability. And that's my email address is Emily. It's narcissistic email address. I always feel embarrassed about sharing it. It's emily@emilysutherland.me. Talk about being embarrassed about it being all about you. I'm like, oh, I'm embarrassed every time I do my email address. But that's it.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, I will have the recording up in the team page tomorrow so you guys can tag your coaches who weren't on live. But thanks so much, Emily. I appreciate it. And thanks for being on. I'll see you guys soon. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.